Technology in modern weather forecasting is beneficial to us. It even saves lives. But what do you know about predicting the weather without modern technology? Hey, this is episode 784 of the Ready Your Future podcast, where I connect you with resources that will help you prepare for a better future. It's all about loving your people, getting prepared, and living free. I'm Todd Sepulveda, a regular guy living in the suburbs who understands the need to be better prepared for the future. Hey, are you looking to up your preparedness knowledge? Don't spend time bouncing around the internet for the best preparedness content. Instead, sign up for the top preparedness articles and get them right in your email. For $5 a month, you can get the top preparedness articles from around the internet sent to your email weekly. You can choose to read them or drop them in the Pocket app and have them read to you as you go about your day. The Buy Me a Coffee link to the top preparedness articles is in the show notes. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Ready Your Future podcast. Hey, not a very long one today, but one that I think is really interesting. Talking about how to predict the weather without our modern technology. And just a real quick story before we get started here. I was out this weekend and running errands, and at one of the stores that I was at, it started pouring down rain, and we've had a lot of rain this last week here in Houston. And so it's just started pouring down rain, and I didn't have an umbrella with me, and I was going to continue running errands. I didn't want to get soaking wet and then continue running all these errands. So I was able to open up my cell phone, and I went to the weather app, and I brought up the radar, and I was able to see that in about 7 minutes, all the rain was going to stop. And so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to wait 7 minutes. To me, I'd rather wait 7 minutes and stay dry than to just, get out there and run in the pouring rain. So I sat down on a little bench, and it was funny kind of watching everyone as they were coming in, right? They were coming in, people were soaking wet. People had baby carriers. They had big umbrellas trying to cover up the babies, trying to cover up themselves. I mean, they were really coming in just dripping wet. And I was just kind of amazed. Is like, hey, if you just would have waited like 7 minutes, if you would have just waited 5 minutes, and it was kind of a dramatic stop to the rain. It didn't just kind of like level off. It was kind of like it was there. And then boom, it stopped. And so, I waited that time, and I was able to walk and didn't feel any rain on there. And so that was a great benefit. It's a great benefit to have the technology and the weather apps that we have. If you don't have one, I would experiment with some of them and see which one works for you. I've had, different success. Right now I'm using the weather, weather.com's app, and it's not 100% the best, but in this situation, it did get me through. It did help me. And so I think it's a big benefit to have those kinds of, technology, the weather apps and other things that we have on our phones. But what happens when we don't have that? When we don't have that, and we're in a situation where we need to know the weather for whatever reason it might be, whether it's, we're gardening, whether we want to, bring in stuff and not leave it out in the rain or whatever it might be. You want to have some kind of idea of what to do. And plus, I think it's interesting. There's some cool little sayings here. Some of y'all might have already heard these before. In fact, one of them is biblical, and I'll point that out when I get to it. But this article comes to us from homesteadsurvivalsite.com. And the article, like I said, it's not long, but it's entitled How Pioneers Predicted the Weather. And so we're going to read this one here. And then I actually did a little bit of research, went and found some other articles that I just want to point out some other things that this article didn't say, and maybe even correct one thing that this article said that, it might not be true, but we'll kind of go from there. But anyway, here we go. homesteadsurvivalsite.com, How Pioneers Predicted the Weather. Weather prediction in our modern world is a complex and highly technical field, with Doppler radar and weather satellites carrying a lot of the load, but those are recent inventions not available before the last century. Still, people needed to know what to expect from the weather, long before that technology existed. Back in the pioneering days, weather affected planting, harvesting, travel, and a host of other day-to-day activities. Not having some idea of what weather to expect could have some rather grave consequences. While weather affects us all, farmers have to live by it. Plant too early in the year and your seedlings may die to a late freeze. But plant too late and you lose valuable growing time. The same sort of thing happens at the end of the growing season, as that first freeze can kill crops and spoil food. But if you harvest too soon, you won't get the best yield. That may not make much difference if you live in Texas, where you have 2 or 3 growing seasons in a year, but it sure does if you live in Minnesota. Fortunately for those old farmers, weather is interconnected. They could learn a lot about what was happening by watching the actions of animals as well as the result of nature. We might not see those signs today, but to them, they spoke as loudly as the weathermen and probably more accurately. So let's start with the clouds. Any real storm is going to come in via clouds, so it only makes sense to see what those clouds look like and to understand what the different sorts of clouds formations mean. While this only helps as far as we can see, it can give us several hours worth of notice as to what is coming our way. As a starting point, learn to notice how high the clouds are above the ground. Not all clouds fly at the same altitude, but storm clouds tend to be closer to the ground. When the clouds are high, we can expect the weather to be good. The rain clouds we're looking for are known as nimbostratus clouds. They are dark and hang low. On the other hand, cumulus clouds, which are higher and tower way up into the sky, are an indication of rain showers later in the day. The clouds most of us think of as storm clouds, called cumulonimbus clouds, are the harbinger of thunderstorms. They will usually start gathering early in the day, accumulating throughout the day. When you see them, watch their direction. If they're coming towards you, expect thunderstorms. So long before those cumulonimbus clouds appear, cirrus clouds, which are stringy and fluffy, traveling high in the sky, broadcast that bad weather will appear within the next 36 hours. Another such indicator are autocumulus clouds, which look like fish scales. When fall and winter come around, we can often get an indicator that cold weather is on the way by the appearance of cirrocumulus clouds. These are small and puffy, usually appearing in rows. So when I taught elementary science, that was one of the things that we would teach, is we would teach clouds. And, we would teach basic clouds. We wouldn't go into a lot, but it was something that we built on every year. And, of course, we would do the thing where we had the cotton balls and we would, simulate what it was, and kids would write it down. And there was a saying, I can't remember the saying that I had for my kids to be able to remember what the different clouds did. It's been that long ago. I was trying to write it down the other day as I was preparing for this one, and I'm like, man, I just cannot remember it. So it was driving me nuts. But there was a saying that we would do, and it just helped the kids remember what those clouds would do. And it was, it just made it really easy to remember. I'm killing myself now because I can't remember that saying. But anyway, that's one of the ways to learn, and it would be helpful to just remember things, is coming up with those things. But the clouds were one of those things that we studied, and a lot of the times the kids would say, "Hey, why do we need to know this?" And because of the preparedness aspect of it, I could always say, well, maybe you're caught out and you don't have your cell phone, or you don't have the weather app, or you didn't watch the weather, or whatever it might be. And you're caught out there, in the woods, or you're caught out there just, in the day, and you're playing with your friends, and you look up into the sky and you realize it might thunderstorm. And so you might need to head home. So there's always little rationales and things that we would teach them. All right, continuing on with this, article here. Other signs in the sky. While clouds are the main weather indicator in the sky, they aren't the only ones. Everyone knows a rainbow is an indicator of rain. The question then becomes, where is the rain in comparison to you, and which way is it moving? Check the wind, both by looking at the trees and looking at how birds are flying higher above the ground. Weather patterns tend to move from west to east, so if the rainbow is in the west, the rain is coming towards you. At night, a ring around the moon indicates that snow or rain are on the way and will arrive in 72 hours or less. The old sailor's saying of red sky at night, sailors delight, red sky in morning, sailors take warning, actually has some meaning to it. The red sky in the morning refers to a red sunrise. This indicates that the dry air has already passed, meaning that rain or snow is on the way. On the other hand, when the sunset is red, it means that there is a high pressure system on the way, which will bring wind and dry air. This was the part where I was talking about. There is a saying in the Bible, Jesus quotes in Matthew chapter 16, verse 2 and 3. He says to them, when he's talking about the signs and the seasons. So sayings like this have been around since even that time. So verse 2 in Matthew chapter 16 says, he replied to them, when it is evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, there will be a storm today, for the sky is red and threatening. Do you know how to discern the appearance of the sky, but cannot discern the signs of the times? So So I thought that was pretty interesting, right? We could talk about all the, the religious messages there, but I think that it was interesting that even in those days that there was signs that people would look for, and I thought that was pretty interesting. I wanted to kind of point that one out. So moving on in this article, the next portion here is talking about animals. So many animals have an affinity for the weather, to the point that modern weather forecasters should hire a few. If you have domestic livestock, their actions will tell you what weather is on the way. If not, watch the movement of birds and animals, as they need to protect themselves from the weather too. Big game that lives in the mountains, such as deer and elk, move down to lower elevations before the snow falls. When they do, snow is surely on the way, especially if they do so earlier in the season than normal. Frogs know when rain is coming and will croak more and louder when it's on the way. The more they croak, the more rain you should expect. Those frogs aren't the only ones who can predict the rain, though. All sorts of birds are sensitive to the weather. When it's about to rain, they'll be flying closer to the ground. If you see them flying high, don't worry about rain. While bats aren't birds, they also fly. If they're flying around, expect fair weather. But if there are bats near your home and they can't be found at night, expect rain. Cows, too, sense the coming of rain and will move to a sheltered area. If no shelter is available, they'll lie down in groups. Even dogs and cats know when the rain is coming. For some unknown reason, probably associated with changes in the air pressure, cats will clean their ears before it rains. Dogs, on the other hand, will eat grass. Now, don't confuse this with dogs eating grass to make them throw up, though. If you want a natural thermometer, make sure you've got crickets around. Crickets are cold-blooded, so their metabolism is affected by temperature. The faster they chirp, the warmer it is. So count how many chirps in a minute and add 40 to it. That's the temperature in Fahrenheit. Okay, I thought that was interesting, right? So count how many chirps in a minute and add 40 to it. That's the temperature in Fahrenheit. That's a good one. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the last part here. And this is the one that I did a little bit of research on. And so I want to point this one out here. The last one is, don't forget the Farmer's Almanac. So while those pioneers were able to tell much about the weather by watching nature, they also depended on the Farmer's Almanac. Published since 1792, it provides a host of useful information, including weather forecasts for the entire year. Surprisingly, they have proven to be more accurate at predicting upcoming weather than much of our modern technology. Doubling that surprise, they do it a year ahead of time. While the Farmer's Almanac has provided valuable information to farmers for over 200 years, it isn't the first publication of its kind. Benjamin Franklin created what can be considered to be the prototype when he came out with Poor Richard's Almanac. The last year that Franklin published his almanac was 1758 and was immensely popular, which may have something to do with the Farmer's Almanac starting 34 years later. All right, so I went and did a little bit of research on the Farmer's Almanac, and one of the things I thought was interesting was there's actually two, right? There's the Farmer's Almanac, and then there's the Old Farmer's Almanac. Didn't realize that. I thought they were the same thing, but anyway, you always learn something new. One of the things that we heard, a couple of years ago, we had Winter Storm Uri, and that was the one that almost shut down the Texas grid, and the one that I talk about a lot. Then after that, the Farmer's Almanac was predicting that there was going to be an even worse winter storm the next year. And we did have, actually it was Christmas Eve, which we did get some really, really cold temperatures, but it was just, a couple of days and we didn't have any precipitation with it. So we didn't feel the effects like Winter Storm Uri. But anyway, so this article that I was finding, that I found is from Popular Mechanics. It's published October 31, 2022, and it says, how accurate is the Farmer's Almanac? Here's what researchers say. And so basically what they're saying is that a lot of it, and so let me read this here. I'm just going to read one little paragraph here. Why so much flack for the almanac? Well, it's more or less the equivalent of throwing a dart at a board full of meteorology terms. The now defunct Vane website, our rest in peace, went so far as to call its forecast a bunch of malarkey in 2015, and many other news sites have reported the same thing. The almanacs say they can predict weather with around 80% accuracy, but a University of Illinois study disagreed, saying the almanac was only about 52% accurate, which is essentially random chance. All right. So anyway, this one is a short article, but again, coming from Popular Mechanics, and they talked a little bit about it. Let me see here. One little paragraph here. As of 2022, the Old Farmer's Almanac says it uses a secret formula to predict the weather, first created back in 1792. Here's how the book's own site explains the history. We derive our weather forecast from a secret formula that was devised by the founder of this almanac, Robert B. Thomas, in 1792. Thomas believed that weather on Earth was influenced by sunspots, which are magnetic storms on the surface of the sun. So one of the things, if you listen to or you watch the YouTube channel Suspicious Observers with Ben, I know I've had him on the podcast before, there's a lot more to the fact that the sun does influence a lot of our weather and stuff like that. The magnetic pull of the earth and the sun and all of that goes into it. And so there's probably a little bit more truth than that, but I thought it was interesting that they were able to go back and look at the predictions and say it was more of a 50% because, we have all the farmers' almanacs and they're able to look at the history of that. Maybe it's just there isn't really a secret formula. I don't know, but I always, thought that the farmers' almanac was pretty right on. But if they're really going back and looking at everything, 52% accuracy, I don't know if you want to stake a lot of your food production and stuff like that to it. Anyway, there's other ways that you can that nature can help you predict the weather. Just found another site here called gardeningknowhow.com, and this article is called Plants That Predict the Weather. I was just going to point out a couple of things here on this one. Actually, maybe just one. One ancient way of predicting weather is through persimmon seed weather form. Source a locally grown American persimmon and cut it in half and remove a seed. Cut this in half. If the seed is fork-shaped, we are going to have a mild winter. A spoon shape indicates a lot of snow, while a knife shape predicts a bitterly cold winter. So do the predictions work? About as often as our groundhog's shadow is accurate. All right, so maybe that's not one that you want to stake a lot of faith in, but one that people might have used in the past. This is coming to us from a PDF from the Ohio State University Extension, Cuyahoga County. I think I said that correctly. There's a lot of little things here, and I'll link to these in the show notes, and so you can go check these out. So checking for humidity. One of the most reliable of all natural weather indicators is the pine cone. These have traditionally been used to forecast the weather as they change shape according to whether it is wet or dry. In dry weather, pine cones open out as the scales shrivel up and stand out stiffly. When it is damp, they absorb moisture, and as the scales become flexible again, the cone returns to its normal shape. All right, so that's one that's interesting. What about morning glory? So if you have some morning glory in the garden or growing around the house, the petals of the morning glory act in a similar way, with wide open blooms indicating fine weather and shut petals predicting rain and bad weather. Chickweed, dandelions, bindweeds, and wild indigo, clovers, and tulips all fold their petals prior to the rain. Here's an interesting one. In coastal areas, seaweed is often used as a natural weather forecaster. Kelp, for example, shrivels and feels dry in fine weather, but swells and becomes damp if rain is in the air. Any truth probably comes from salt remaining on the surface of the weed. Salt is hygroscopic, which means it will absorb moisture when the air is humid. This may mean the chance of rain is slightly higher. Okay, another way to tell through using plants, an increased growth of mushrooms, moss, and lichens indicates moisture weather. Rhododendrons have the unique ability to act as a temperature gauge. As the air temperature rises, their leaves begin to unfurl. At 20 degrees, they are completely closed, and when the temperature reaches 60 degrees, they are completely open. Now, that doesn't say Fahrenheit or Celsius on that one. Here's another proverb that you can maybe use. When grass is dry at morning light, look for rain before the night. All right, I don't know about that one. Maybe that's true or not. You can check that one out. All right, one of the things that that you'll hear is to take a little bit of time to smell the air. So on this one here, it says, take a deep breath, close your eyes, and smell the air. Plants release their waste in a low-pressure atmosphere, generating a smell like compost and indicating an upcoming rain. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Swamps will release methane just before a storm because of the lower pressure, which leads to unpleasant smells. And there's another proverb that says, flowers smell best just before a rain, scents are stronger in moisture air associated with rainy weather. All right, so there's a lot of other little things out there. If you know of any that you have heard before in the past, send them to me at todd@readyyourfuture.com, and maybe we'll revisit those a little bit later on. I thought this was always interesting to be able to just have some of this knowledge, I think, where you're able to draw from if you need it. And some of it is, just stuff that people have said throughout the years and maybe doesn't really hold water. And others, I think, have stood the test of time, kind of like what I said here about the scripture in the Bible that Jesus quoted, right? One of the things that I think, too, is helpful is having like a weather station at home. And so there are some weather stations on Amazon that you can look into, not very expensive. Of course, anytime you're looking at Amazon, you want to look at the reviews and find the ones that are good. But you have those weather stations that are electronic that you can kind of set up some kind of like a probe out in, like outside on your fence or whatever. And then you have the main interface inside that you can look at. But then there's also those other like analog ways of telling, telling the temperature and stuff like that. I know my brother gave me one of those, those glass thermometers years ago. And, it was pretty accurate, where the temperature will rise and it has little balls on the inside, but then there's other little analog ways to do it. One of the things that I've been kind of interested in, just because they kind of look cool and, just to put on your desk or whatever, is weather storm glass. And so you'll see different things about that. Some people will say, it doesn't work. Other people say it does work. You just need to give it some time to settle, and you can't disturb it. You can't be picking it up and moving it around, but you got to let the stuff that's in there settle. And then, after a couple of weeks, it will get pretty accurate there. But I do have a Amazon store where I put some of these things on if you want to go take a look at them. I can't link to individual specific Amazon Amazon items, but I can link to my store. And if you do buy from the store, well, then you can, I get a little bit of a commission. It doesn't raise your cost or anything, but I do get a little bit of a commission, very small commission, but anything is, appreciated. But anyway, I'm going to link to the store where I have some of these things if you're interested in going and taking a look at it. And I've been placing other things that I've been talking about there as well as some of the Ready Your Future merchandise that I have over on Amazon. All right, guys. Well, that is it for episode 784. Like always, I'm going to link to this article in the show notes, as well as some of the other things that I talked about here. And you can go check it out, maybe do a little bit more research as well. If you found this episode valuable, I would appreciate a review wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you haven't subscribed, make sure you click the subscribe button in your favorite podcast app. And that way you never miss another episode of Sweet Prepper Goodness. And lastly, don't forget to join the email list if you haven't. When you do, I'm going to send you my blackout checklist to know what you should do before, during, and after the lights go out. And with that, choose to live a more self-reliant life. Choose not to be so dependent on the government, grid, or the grind. Until next time, live with no regrets and stay prepped and aware. Peace.